So who is Atome? We are actually a pretty young company. We're possibly the most junior company of the panel tonight. We were created 2 years ago and listed in December 2021. We are a company focused on development of green hydrogen to ammonia and actually to fertilizer projects. So whilst hydrogen is the hype, everybody has heard about hydrogen, our company is really focused into greening fertilizers, which is a market that exists today. Right? So we're talking a market which is about $200 billion a year, and it also emits more carbon than aviation and shipping combined. So whilst you and I can decide whether or not we want to take a flight, we cannot decide whether or not we want to eat bread and if this bread is green or not. Usual disclaimers. So we are the largest UK-based developer listed on the LSE, and it's a very easy one to say because we are the only one. Right. And so what we are doing is currently we are building the largest green ammonia fertilizer facility in all of Latin America, and we are in the engineering stages. This first project will be in Paraguay, leveraging existing hydroelectric power, and I will get into the details why, and in the middle of the world's largest importer market of fertilizers. The whole idea is to be able to produce domestically and regionally, to decentralize your production of fertilizers instead of importing it, but at the same time, the ability to export those fertilizers into markets which will eventually pay a green premium for fertilizers. So our first project, so what we call the ETA project, phase 1, it's sized at about 145 megawatts. That's the electricity consumption. And we'll be producing about 270,000 tons of fertilizers per year. To give you a sense, if you looked at the average price of fertilizer in 2022, you'll be looking at a project generating nearly $140 million, unlevered returns of about 29%. Clearly, this is, looking 22 was a very high price of fertilizers. Now we are down to around $490 per ton. But obviously, it shows you that you can actually economically produce green fertilizers without the need to go after basically subsidies, carbon premiums, you name it. But of course, the whole idea is if it's green, there will be at some point a premium. And so to give you a sense, 1 ton of green ammonia is displaced about 2 tons of carbon. And so it allows us to be able to say, and to, on a scope 3 basis, that this one project will displace about 500,000 tons of carbon per year. So clearly from a carbon market point of view, if you are looking at the futures of the carbon market, it's quite fast growing. If you're looking at European ETS systems, so the emission trading regulation, by 2026, the future curve says it's going to be about $100. And if you think that in 2026, actually, there will be carbon borders adjustments, which will basically tax gray fertilizers, so fertilizers which come from hydrocarbon, we could eventually be in a good position. But what is very important to say is that this is an upside, and actually this is not in these numbers, right? So what we see and the way we treat carbon premiums and carbon credits as an upside, but not as the base of our business, right? Our business are very much industrial businesses. And we are looking at a pipeline of projects, the first two projects in Paraguay, the second project in Costa Rica, and we have another project in Iceland, which basically is taking a bit more time, and I will get into that later. So it's great to have a good idea, but if you don't have a team to deliver it, it's going to be a bit complicated. So everybody you see in here is a shareholder of Atome, has put money into Atome at the same share price as every single investor. And for us, it's always very important to show alignment with our investors. Our chairman, Peter, who's our largest shareholder, he's had a track record of obviously doing one very successful company called Imperial Energy, which basically exited at about $2.5 billion back in 2009. He was also chairman of a number of engineering companies, and that's very important. At the end of the day, what we are developing is a chemical facility, a green chemical facilities, and it's all about margins, right? You need to have that culture to go after margin. It's all great and good to say it's green, it's still margin. You have to show you are competitive with the imports of non-green products. And myself, so I'm the CEO, I was also involved into the origination of Atome. So I started my career as an engineer, actually commissioning power plants in the Midlands with GE, then moved to the oil and gas sector as an engineer still at Schlumberger, then moved to the oil and gas financing. So I was co-head of oil and gas finance at Standard Chartered Bank, where I did some of the largest emerging markets financings. And before Atome, actually, I spent 9 years at the World Bank, at the International Finance Corporation, which is the private investment arm of the World Bank. And I was chief investment officer of the global energy portfolio, which was about $7 billion across hydrocarbons and renewables assets, across equity and debt. Obviously, you need people on the ground to deliver. As the director of Paraguay, which is our first large project, we have Jim Spalding, who I met when he was on the board of the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank. Also, importantly, he was one of the directors of the Itaipu Dam, the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world, and he was also Minister of Finance into the country. So it's all about having team who understand the sector and who understand the political economy for delivering what are really very impactful projects. As non-exec, we have Maria Rose de Valadares. Maria Rose used to be the head of hydrogen for the International Energy Agency unit based in Washington, D.C. For over 15 years. So she's really one of these person who has been involved into the hydrogen economy, who really knows what's behind the brochure, and who can really tell, let's say it what it is, tell it as it is, because there's been a lot of hype in the hydrogen sector, and I think especially on the technology side, it was all about getting behind that hype about who can actually deliver and how to make sure in our selection process that we will actually be talking to the right names. And finally, the most recent addition to the team, all right, so we have operations, we have finance, we have understanding on the ground, is Terry Bakken. So it's great. We are going to be producing fertilizer. How do we sell it? Well, actually, Terry came on board. Terry used to be the senior VP for fertilizers for Eurochem and Yara. He spent 35 years into the sector, and Yara was, or is still, the largest fertilizer company in Europe. Just a little bit of a background on hydrogen. I think a lot of us have heard about hydrogen, but what is it? The reality is hydrogen, it's a chemical, right? And historically, most of the hydrogen we have used has been within refineries, within chemical processes, using hydrocarbons. So you take CH4, natural gas, you take the carbon on one side, the hydrogen on the other side, and you crack it. The way to make green hydrogen, we've known how to do it for over 100 years, is you take water, you take a lot of power, run that water for an electrolyzer, separate the H, separate the O. What we are seeing clearly is from hydrogen, you can make synthetic fuels. You can also look at cars. There's been a lot of discussion around that. But most importantly, the biggest use for hydrogen today is ammonia. Right? And actually, the biggest use of ammonia today, 80%, is fertilizers. So we took the point of view that we believe in the future of a hydrogen economy, but we have to be extremely pragmatic. Where do you use hydrogen today? Ammonia. Where do you use ammonia today? Fertilizer. You go after that market. Take one risk at a time. Don't try to create the market, the downstream market. Go really where you can actually sell your product today. So this goes a little bit into the details of how it happens, right? How you go from, you take your raw material, obviously your water and your electricity. You make green hydrogen, and then you use synthesis or Haber-Bosch processes, which is another 100-year-old process. Most of the fertilizers that we use today are made using the Haber-Bosch process. And after that, you just add limestone, and you end up with a final product, which is your fertilizer. And to give you the idea is that today, 95% of all fertilizer comes from fossil fuel. Right? Then you look at, obviously, the fact that we have now a complete step change on how we are looking at things. Right? It's very clear how we have to move and how regulation has moved to help develop solar and wind. But now we got at this point where the hydrogen economy is getting the same amount of support. And you've seen the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. We're talking nearly $500 billion of grants. You're looking at what happened in the EU with a Fit for 55 and the Green New Deal. So it just shows you how things are moving and how the regulation has moved. one thing which became very, very clear, which was unexpected even when we listed the company, and what has accelerated the movement is the Ukraine war. And what people did not realize, it's not about gas for heating. Actually, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine is 30%, 30, of all of the fertilizer globally. Right? And suddenly we saw that we had to make choices in the UK, where we used to have production of fertilizer in the UK from North Sea gas, that these fertilizer factories were closed because we decided to prioritize natural gas to go towards heating. At the same time, we saw that we lost the supply from Russia. So it really showed that we were working in a very weak system, obviously, not only a hydrocarbon-based system, but also a very weak system. So it really pushes the importance of being able to develop fertilizer facilities in other places than where you have them at the moment. And just to show you what's been happening, and this is just over the past year, not only about what happened to a number of fertilizers facilities across the world, but also what has moved very significantly now, is that over the past year, the EU has announced that they were going to start to tax from 2026 the import of fertilizers. And you had large projects which have now become also funded. So in Saudi Arabia, for example, they just financed a 5 billion debt finance for a project to make green ammonia from Saudi Arabia. So this gives you a sense of travel. So in this slide, and obviously all of this slide pack, and honestly, there's a much better video than what I'm presenting at the moment available on our website. It gives you an idea of where the demand for fertilizer is growing. So as I mentioned, our first production is going to be in the largest fertilizer market in the world. But let's also be clear, the population on Earth is growing at about 1 billion people every 12 years. Right? So we need more fertilizer. There's no choice if you want to feed that population. So you have a growing market, which on top of that needs to become greener. It also is a market which today is extremely correlated to the price of natural gas. And as you know, in a number of sectors, now getting funding to develop oil and gas projects is becoming more difficult. So the oil prices are going up, the gas prices are going up. So the whole thing is how can you actually produce more green fertilizer in different places? But what we are seeing is that today, whilst this is the price for natural gas-based fertilizer and ammonia, the cost of green fertilizer currently is extremely high. The reason for it is that because the cost of power in a number of places is very high. So for us, it was all about finding places where the cost of power will be very low in a market which will buy your fertilizers. And I mean, this is not something, there is no secret sauce in here. You're looking at about $750, which is the price to produce green fertilizer in Europe. Our cost of production is half of this price, right? Because we are where we are. As you may know, in Europe today, if I want to develop a green project, just even in the UK, if I go to the grid and ask National Grid, can I connect a power plant, a wind farm, a solar farm, it will take about 10 years for me to have that connection. And it is the same thing in Europe, and in the US now it's 5 years. So that's one side, that's the supply, the electricity supply side. Now the demand side, what we are seeing, and as I mentioned, it's an industry which generates 2.6 gigaton per year, right? It's a large impact. But also what we are seeing is the consumers are also asking for greener products, right? So you have the Nestle's, the Cargill, the ADMs, which are not names which we don't really think about in our daily lives, but actually they are really pushing farmers to use greener fertilizers in order for them to meet their own net zero goals, and on top of that, make sure they will have a steady supply of fertilizers. So Paraguay, why Paraguay? Right, so when we developed the strategy for Atome nearly 3 years ago, we were very clear that you needed, if you wanted to have zero risk, zero technology risk, so zero electrolyzer risk, you needed baseload power, hydropower, available today. Like we didn't want to go and start building power facilities, which will take 3 years, which will be more capex. Is where can we find places where you have power today? And the world's largest exporter of hydropower today is Paraguay, right? Bar none. And this, you see at the bottom right, Itaipu is the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world, of which Paraguay only uses 30% of its own share, which means every single day it exports between 2 to 5 gigawatts of power into Brazil, into Argentina. So it's a great opportunity for the country to use that domestic power and to make upgraded products with it. At the same time, it's part of Mercosur, so it's an economic union between Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, which means there are no taxes. So if you can produce fertilizer in the country and sell it into Brazil at zero tax, for them, it's a very good solution to have basically an upgraded product and provide a solution. It's also the fourth largest producer of soybean globally, right? So you see this river, which is the Paraná River. It's one of the world's largest rivers. There's about 3,000 barges on it every single day. So it gives you a sense of the amount of trade that you have. From an economical point of view, it's BB+ rated. There are discussions to actually upgrade the country to investment grade at the moment. There's obviously the fact that it's a stable country. Presidents can only do one term. Right? They had a pretty brutal revolution 40 years ago, and that really forced the country into looking at things very differently from its neighbors in Brazil and Argentina. So it's very important to have, let's say, an island of stability in a very highly dollarized economy. And today, Paraguay is the country with the lowest amount of inflation and the highest GDP. So for us, it's a great partner to be in. The project itself, right? So if you look at this, so we have a power purchase agreement for 145 megawatt at around $31, which is the lowest cost of power globally available today. It's also in the middle of the market, and you have, I'm going to go here. So Villeta is the industrial port of Paraguay, where all of the fertilizer is imported and all of the agri-products are exported to the Atlantic. Each one of those is an industrial port owned by one of these large agri-traders. This is the site that we have bought about a year ago, and this over here is a substation, an existing Siemens substation, where we will get the power from, so just across the road, and develop the project over here. So what we have is today we have the power purchase agreement, we have bought the land, we have also started engineering and design with Casale and Obas. The choice of Casale was evident for us. It is the oldest licensor of ammonia and fertilizer engineering. We are working with the Inter-American Development Bank, so the World Bank equivalent for Latin America, and Natixis, which is France's second largest corporate bank, to raise the funding to basically, finance the project. So we're talking about $371 million of capex. So this is where I go back to what I used to do before Atome. And it's about financing the asset at the asset level, at the SPV level. And so now, as we said publicly, we have launched the financing process, which is currently ongoing. And I will get into the engineering just after. So this, what you see on the right is basically the engineering facility that has been developed so far. So this large building is where the electrolyzers are. So you have power lines coming here. The power comes here. This is the water treatment facility. So the river, Paraguay River, is over there. So we are treating the water. To give you a sense, we use about 0.006% of the flow of the river. So we have zero impact on the water table. You put that water, put the electrolyzer. It goes into the Haber-Bosch process, which then makes ammonia. Then it goes into the nitric acid unit, which then stores ammonium nitrates. And this over here is where you store basically the dolomite and the limestone, where you crush it, and you mix your ammonium nitrate solution with the rocks to basically end up with a powder, which becomes your bags of fertilizer. Right? It sounds simple. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's fine. And this just shows you where we are at the moment, and we are pretty much at the step where we have started now the financing process. We are discussing with off-takers, so we're talking about the Yaras, the Ameropas, the Nitrons, who have already expressed a lot of interest to take all of the production, because today we have a market which basically needs green fertilizers but doesn't have access to it. And the final thing which happened over the summer is that the government has given us tax-free zone status. So even though the country itself has very low taxation, we're talking about 10%, with this tax-free zone status, our cost of export will be about 0.5%. So it's about $7 million more revenue per year, which is nothing to cry home about. But more importantly, it shows you how aligned the government is with what we are trying to do. We are already starting to work on a phase 2 of 300 megawatt, so about 2.5 times the size. What you see over here on the top right is a brand new substation of 1 gigawatt, where Ande, the utility, has reserved 300 megawatt for us. And we expect that by the middle of next year, we will have finished the basic engineering to start to go into the development. More recently, we have also announced a new entry into Costa Rica in a company called National Ammonia Corporation in JV with a company called Cavendish from the Grupo Purdy. Purdy is the largest corporate in Costa Rica. It's a group making about $400 million a year and really focused about, again, copy-pasting what we are doing today in our phase 1 in Paraguay so we can go very quickly into another project. What's very interesting in Costa Rica and Ecuador is just that these are places where you have premium products. You know, pineapples, bananas, you know, things which actually you can sell at a large premium where the cost of fertilizer is very small. So if you can make greener premium, let's say, pineapples, you actually have a very good position for the country to stay green. I mentioned very briefly Iceland. You know, in Iceland, the case has been looking to ammonia towards shipping. So essentially now you have the shipping sector, which is able to use engines running on ammonia. It's still a little bit young in the technology flank. So we are trying to progress this thing. It's a bit slower than expected. But also, when we started in Iceland, it was about 30 megawatt. And what we saw is that on the fertilizer side, things have accelerated a lot more than expected. So from a news flow point of view, as I mentioned, you know, we're looking towards finishing engineering and design. We're negotiating the offtake agreement. We will get into a financial investment decision. And of course, you know, announcing the financing results. So that is coming up, you know, one by one. We are being very methodical in the way we develop our projects. So to give you a sense of what happened since December 21, right? So the most recent event we had was actually the investment from Baker Hughes, which took 6% into the company. Baker Hughes is a $27 billion energy engineering company. And what they saw is that we were developing very fast a number of our projects. And they are also a large supplier of compressors. So it was a good technical partnership between us to really leverage some of their technical abilities. Also on the business development side, because obviously they see a number of opportunities out there. And then obviously moving on. So I will leave it there and move on to questions.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Really interesting. Thank you. A question right at the front straight away.
Sorry. This is a slightly off-field thing. I mean, Itaipu was a magnificent project, which I think was built 40 or 50 years ago.
40 years ago, you're absolutely correct, yes.
Were they just wasting their power, or are you taking green energy away from something else which now has to be replaced?
Sure. So Itaipu is a 14 gigawatt. It's 50-50 owned between Brazil and Paraguay. And Paraguay, so it means that 7 gigawatt is owned by Paraguay. But because they don't have enough demand domestically, you know, it's mostly an agri country, they've been selling that power into Brazil.
But it's still being used.
So it's still being used, but from the country's point of view, they're selling it at a very low cost into Brazil. So the whole idea is, you know, our industrial tariff is higher than what they're selling it into Brazil. So it's the opportunity for the country to upgrade itself and to displace imports of gray fertilizers and then replace that by green fertilizers. But it's a good question.
Nick?
Hello. Thank you for that. It was very interesting. I know nothing about chemistry, but when you're going through the process which you described, are there any nasty byproducts? And if so, what happens to them? That's question number one.
Sure.
And question number two is, what currency is all this in?
So it's very much dollarized,
Right.
So that's the advantage, clearly. My costs are dollarized and my output will be dollarized. From a byproduct point of view, it's hydrogen and oxygen. And actually, what you want to do is, what can I optimize? And from the oxygen point of view, there are two ways. Number one, obviously, we've all seen what happened during COVID, so the ability to sell it on the medical side, but we'll be producing a lot of oxygen, right? So too much for the local market. The other side is you can put the oxygen back into the water stream, which enables you to treat water, right? So my first job was, you know, industrial water treatment. So it's actually beneficial for the environment you are in to increase the oxygen, because as we are seeing, especially with a fair amount of climate change, where there's been issues on the water tables, if you can, and which means that this water has less oxygen, which has negative effect on the fish life. So putting that oxygen back into the river basically makes the river itself healthier. But yeah, we only have H2O on one side, the N which comes from the air, so thankfully there are no nasties attached to it. But the end product, the fertilizer itself, yes, you have to be careful on how you take care of it and how you use it. So from a storage point of view, absolutely, you have to be mindful about that.
Question here, please.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. The way you describe the full supply chain in Paraguay, in that you have the hydro electricity, and you have you make the hydrogen, and then the fertilizer, which you sell in the local market. It seems to make a lot of sense. At the same time, you mentioned the fact that one of the benefits of green hydrogen is that in markets where they're going to pay a premium for fertilizers that are made from in a green way, that could be quite attractive for you to sell the fertilizers abroad. So, is that going to be possible for you, or are you tied into the local market?
No. So thanks for that question. And maybe I went too fast. So to give you an idea, so in Paraguay itself, right? So if you have to think of Paraguay plus Brazil plus Argentina, it's a 30 million ton market per year. That's what you can access. And let's say the first quarter of that market, so about 7 million ton, is about $30 of basically logistics from where we are. So it's a very low logistical cost for commodity, which is today around $450, $500 a ton. So and most of that today is imported. So the cost of import is around $100 a ton if it comes, let's say, from Saudi Arabia. For us, our product, we could actually sell it into Europe, and we've already done the calculation with the traders that I was mentioning earlier, at around $80 to $90 a ton, which means that it's only if I can get more than $100 a ton of green premium that it's worth going in these countries. If you believe everything on the letter as far as carbon border adjustment mechanisms, it would look like the premium itself would be around $150 to $200 a ton. Right, that's what it says on the paper. It's not enacted. It's not, let's say, the law has been passed in Europe. The application decrees have been done, but we haven't really seen it for sure. Right, it's going to happen really in 26. But we are seeing a number of companies preparing for that, and of course, us being able to be one of the first one to produce. Because of the design choices we have made and because we're able to leverage on existing hydropower, we will be one of the first to be able to offer that product. So you'll have a market which may be very long on demand for green and very short on supply. So that might be the disconnect. But the advantage is today we are significantly lower cost than the import of the grey stuff.
If I may just add another very quick question. It seems to make a lot of sense also that you focused on the fertilizers, and I think you made a very interesting point initially that we're targeting this market rather than going downstream where the economics are a bit more dubious. Have you considered, or are you considering going into the industrial sector, because that's obviously a sector where we've been using hydrogen for many decades, and we've already started greening it a little bit, and there seems to be quite a bit of potential there. So
H2 Green Steel is one of a recent success story. It still relies massively on subsidies. So the reality is we can get to $1 billion company without having to go into other sectors, right? So the idea for us, it's you have to be extremely focused, and if we start going into many directions, that's going to stretch us a little bit too thin. We would much rather have this blueprint, which nobody has done until today. Like nobody has actually spent the money to do the engineering we have done. Again, there is no special sauce in it. Like there are 6 packages. There is no technology risk. It's just the choices that we have made of putting things together in a certain way using existing technology. So it would be a bit, let's say, a wasted opportunity to start thinking about going into green steel, for example, when clearly our core strength and the way we have built the management team is really towards that aspect.
Gentleman over here next, please.
Yeah, are you considering issuing shares as part of your fundraise, or are you going to...
Excuse me?
Are you considering issuing more shares as part of your fundraise, or are you going to use offtakes and loans? So
the way we are doing the fundraise is each project which have its own SPV, right? So a special purpose vehicle which will be financed by itself. So the way, when I was at the IFC, I would invest not at corporate, I would invest at the project level. And so a number of green infrastructure funds are looking for projects and have direct access to the project. because from their point of view, they don't really want to pay for G&A and business development and things like that. Right? They really want to have a project and are ready to pay for a return, a lower return at that project level. So the way we are working it is we are going to have a mix of debt, equity, and mezz at the project level. So it's all about maximizing the project itself. And when it comes, for what the raise we could and would do at the company level, so at Atome PLC, I mean, clearly, if we listed is to use the market, will be towards more like new opportunities and new business development where the multiple for that money raised is a lot higher than the project level, right? So if you think about it, that if I'm raising money at PLC level, it's to get 40% IRR. If I'm raising money at the asset level, I will offer around 20% IRR to the investors. That's how you work with disconnects, right? And then the other side for us is we've always wanted to be very clear that we will always be very opportunistic when we raise money, which is the best situation that you can ever be in is, one, raise money when you don't need it, right? And if there are options and if a window is open, you take it because you never know what can come through a window. At the moment, we are refusing things coming in, projects, I mean. And obviously, we have to deliver this first project first and foremost. But it's also, we are also realistic that, we are leaving opportunities on the side because we know what we are and we don't want to raise money at the PLC level at this particular stage. Hopefully, it answered your question.
Any other questions, please? And we're kind of running out of time, but I've got one quickie, if I may. And I'm not going to hold you to these dates, so don't worry. But indicative timelines, I think you've got in here that you're going to have hopefully the financing announcement on that. Once you have an announcement on financing, how long until you start breaking ground?
Yep.
And then how long, roughly, till you complete?
So
the
one
facility?
one important thing is, and that's one of these things that people forget a lot of the time. So we already have the environmental and social approvals. We now obviously already have the authorization, which basically gives us the authorization to break ground and to start building things. So as far as the land clearing, we will start out early next year. And the building time from FID is about 22 to 26 months. And that's obviously because we are very, very advanced into the engineering side, so we know pretty well. As far as announcements from our point of view, most likely, we will go in a sequence where it's going to be, let's say, announcing who the off-taker will be, announcing, obviously, maybe the financing partner, and then the final investment decision. So we're doing a lot of things at the same time. Clearly, we will try to do as much as we can to announce as much as we can within this quarter. Can things move into next year, into Q1? Everything's possible. The important message that I want to leave, and especially on the financing side, it's never a question. It's not a question of whether we can finance it; it's how long it will take. Right? When we're working with the IDB, with the IFCs, these large development finance institutions, they don't beat the same drum. Right? This is emerging markets; it takes a bit more time. But at the moment, we have really good traction, so we are very pleased about the direction of travel. And it's quite key because they will give you terms of financing that nobody else will. So if it means an extra 3 months, from an IRR point of view, it makes total sense. But no matter what will happen, we are today on track to start commissioning the plant in 2025 because there is going to be this window from 2026 and for about 3 to 4 years where we will have a massive opportunity and a massive premium because we'll have a product that very, very few people will have, which is a zero carbon fertilizer product.
That's terrific. Olivier, thank you very much indeed.
Sure.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight.